Great morning, great afternoon, great evening, wherever this conversation finds you. I am Travis Gray, and today we are transforming with our guest, Dr. Nick Walker. She is a transdisciplinary scholar, author, and futurist whose wide-ranging work explores the edges and intersections of somatic psychology, depth psychology, queer theory, neurodiversity, embodiment, and transformative practice. She is a faculty member at California Institute of Integral Studies, senior aikido instructor at the Aiki Arts Center in Berkeley, author of Neurodiversity Studies. She also writes speculative fiction, including the urban fantasy webcomic Weird Luck. I am extremely excited to finally get the opportunity to sit down with a brilliant scholar, somebody really dear to my heart, because almost 10 years ago, when I began this journey of transpersonal psychology, Dr. Nick Walker, was one of my very first instructors. I'm so tremendously excited for this conversation. How are you?
I am very well. It's wonderful to see you.
Wonderful to see you. So I'm curious. I've never asked you this question before. And how is it that you found yourself in this world of transpersonal psychology? How did your professional journey begin?
Wonderful question. My journey in transpersonal psychology started long before I came to the academic world or had heard the phrase transpersonal psychology. So it started with aikido. It started with me beginning my aikido training at the age of 12. And that was this amazing eye-opener because, I just went looking for a martial art, thinking, learn to fight better. I lived in dangerous, violent neighborhoods, and I thought, I'll learn to fight better. But what I found was this deep transformative mindfulness practice. And even though I was 12 and not yet fully able to grasp, I'm still struggling to grasp the full implications of Aikido, the full complexities of the art and its full potentials. I feel like I'm always just starting to get a sense of it. And certainly I didn't have any language to articulate what I was discovering when I was 12. But what I learned very quickly was just the possibility of self-transformation, the possibility that through some sort of dedicated mindful practice, we can change ourselves and fulfill potentials that maybe we had no idea we had. And that's the revelation that's kept me going ever since. And I've just kept exploring the possibilities of ever since.
Yeah, I love that. So I have found that some of the most profound transformative practice are the insights and wisdom from them are the subtleties in them, and the subtleties of Aikido, in the very little practice that I've had the opportunity to experience through courses at Sophia University. And I did have an opportunity to go to an Aikido dojo a few times here in San Jose. And the subtleties of the art is such a beautiful thing. It's like the subtleties of dance. And when you see a transformative dance practice in action, you can catch those subtleties, the profound insights that come up out of being attentive to that is such a beautiful thing.
Yes, and it's endless too. There's no end to the levels of depth and subtlety. There's so many that aren't apparent at first, and it's like the more one goes, the more one progresses on the path, the more one discovers, there's this other level that I can just start sensing is there for me to somehow reach into. And it's always, there's another level that I sense after this one, or deeper than this one, or another level of refinement that I'm just getting a hint of. And by the time one gets there, one is starting to become aware of the next level after that.
Yes, and so I hear the thirst for that next level in your speaking about this. Is this what inspired the interest in somatic psychology as well? Was that always in your relationship with Aikido?
Yeah, because I started with Aikido, because I started with this embodied practice where the transformation starts with the physical actions and the physical action upon the body, that somatic orientation has always been there for me.
Mhm.
And what I started to learn early on from Aikido is this whole concept of attunement and connection, because we're talking about the transpersonal here, going beyond the conventional ego boundaries. And that involves being able to tune in to deeper levels of the self, something larger than the self in the universe, to the world, to one's environment, and to other people also. That I think, to me, empathy and compassion and human connection are a crucial part of transpersonal psychology. That it's not just about, me and my potentials, but what are our potentials to connect with each other. And so what I discovered early on in the Aikido practice, and have been exploring ever since, is this idea, if somebody grabs your arm in Aikido practice, the reflexes are defensive, fight, flight, freeze reflexes, tell us to tense up, whether you're trying to run away or whether you're freezing or whether your impulse is to fight back. There's a tension in the body that activates. And once that happens, what one feels, if one tries to feel into the body, is one's own tension. And one has to physically relax that tension in order to start feeling what's happening in your partner's body and being able to work with it. What's this person grabbing me is just a crisis as long as I am tense. But if I can relax my body while being grabbed, suddenly this person grabbing me is another human being, and I can feel what's happening in their body. And then I have this empathic connection to them, and I can use that to move harmoniously with the energy they're giving me. And that, of course, carries over to so many things, to how we relate to the whole world. That and I didn't have a vocabulary for it outside of Aikido. I started learning it on a physical level, in terms of how do you deal with the physical grab. And then from there, as I began learning psychology, eventually it's like, oh, this is psychodynamic psychology. This is, people have psychological defense mechanisms. And because of those, their personalities so often are just kind of clusters of defense mechanisms and automatic reactions to various things. And how do I hold my ego together and defend it against incursion? That's all that they feel. And it becomes this very self-absorbed, individualistic, and almost narcissistic little reality window, the little reality tunnel that people live in. And if people can expand beyond that, that's what we're talking about with transpersonal psychology, is expanding beyond, ego defenses and the small ego concerns, to allow connection and conversation with something much bigger. And so Aikido, because I came at it through Aikido first, and only later learned psychological theories that articulated that, it's always been a physical process to me. I've always seen this as the psychological defense mechanisms, the being locked into the everyday ego concerns that kind of keep our consciousness smaller, all of that is locked into the body and the physical tensions, what Wilhelm Reich called character armor. And so being able to become aware of those tensions and relax them becomes a transpersonal practice. If I'm going to release these tensions, not just because they're uncomfortable, but I'm going to release tensions and relax even in the face of what seems like threat or crisis, because that transforms my relationship to the moment and to what's happening and allows this deeper level of connection and connection to something beyond the ego. So that is, for me, so much of what the practice is about. And it's this endless mindfulness practice, the endless work of being mindful of deeper levels of tension, deeper levels of reactivity, and how can I open up even more fully?
Yeah. And such a beautiful foundational practice and martial art for a therapist to become a better attuning fork to their clients, to other people. Just people in general can definitely benefit from this practice, this martial art. But when it specifically comes to transpersonal psychology and the reason for having classes in the field of counseling and therapy, to become a better attuning fork to being mindful of yourself and to the tensions and the energetic ups and downs of your client, of yourself and your client, and in the space with one another, in relation to one another, is a really beautiful thing. And you touched on some really cool things about William Reich and those defenses. I think Carl Rogers spoke about the fully functioning person, and one of the qualities of the fully functioning person was a lacking of defenses, that those defenses have been diminished through their own ego development, through their own personal development. That person is then the quality of being fully functioning in the world. To be able to fully function in the world is to be rid of some of the defenses that become the obstructions for our interaction with others, our ability to be interactive with the space, and in our inner subjectivity as well.
Yes, exactly. Yes, the tensions and the psychological defenses and the automatic patterns of reactivity have this effect of limiting our options. And so I'm always looking for how we can expand the range of options. To me, that's central, and that's something that having studied with me, that I contemptuous of behaviorism, but I love humanistic and transpersonal psychology and psychodynamic psychology. And the reason is behaviorism looks at taking a limited set of options and replacing them with a different limited set of options. But I always think the proper goal of therapy is for your client to walk out of therapy with more options than they came in with, more ability to make conscious choices. And for those of us who have devoted ourselves to transpersonal practice, for me at least, it's very much an experience in aikido and in my other transpersonal practices of mastering the art of shape-shifting. Being able to spontaneously flow and adapt and change one's shape in order to relate harmoniously to the situation at hand. And so our habitual tensions and preconceptions and such become a limitation on our capacity to do that. And I do love overcoming limitations.
I love what you're saying about the opening of more options, and yes, via your coursework, via your training, what I've learned from you, I have become pretty contemptuous about behaviorism myself, and from a different angle. So or from a slightly different angle. So I would say that your angle is the advocacy of autism and the autistic people, and it is interesting that that I resonated so strongly with your ideas around neurodiversity because of being a child of a deaf adult. So my mother being deaf, my grandfather being deaf. So I have grown up. I've been raised in such a way that I've been in between these worlds. I've not been quite a hearing person, not quite a deaf person, but somewhere in between, and having to, in some ways, shapeshift between both, and feeling like that there's been such a blessing in that in my life to give me a lot of options in the ways that I can communicate with others, in the forms of how I can relate to others. Is a really beautiful thing. But this behaviorism has been an interesting topic, because over the years I will come across these young aspiring therapists, and they are finding their first job, and for some reason there is always an opening in applied behavioral analysis. There's always they're always hiring. I don't know when they ever fill all of these ABA jobs, but they have these trainings, and I try to be mindful when I'm introducing this concept of neurodiversity to somebody that is working with autism, working with individuals with autism, and finding that they are, this is the only way that they know how to work, and try to, their heart is in the right place. Their heart is to be of service. They only know what they know. And it is interesting when I come across that. I try to be mindful. I try to be conscious and compassionate to maybe the lack of knowing another way to approach these things, to approach that set of options that is being provided to people and being conditioned into others, which is an unfortunate paradigm dynamic that is not serving the best interests of everyone involved, which is just really interesting that is sort of lost on people. But I always am encouraging them to look at your work at neuroqueer.com, previously neurocosmopolitanism.com, now neuroqueer.com, to look at your articles on neurodiversity. What would you encourage for these people that are going into applied behavioral analysis? I think that they're getting some really good tools, some like maybe initial tools to help them in the grander journey of their therapeutic career. But I would like them to not be so fooled by maybe a paradigm that is not serving everyone involved.
Right. Yes, I would encourage them. The problem is they're harming the clients. They're harming children, and they think that they're helping, and they're not. And at this point, what we have is, a couple of generations of autistic people who were subjected to ABA in childhood, who've grown up to say, this traumatized me horribly. This was extremely traumatic for me, and it damaged me in ways that I'm still coming to terms with. And that information is out there, but it's not taught. Somehow people, psychology students are taught about autistic people without being given actual autistic people to listen to, without being exposed to the work of autistic people and what autistic people have to say about their own experience. And I mean, it's a little outrageous, because imagine, if you had a class on, you had a class on like gender or queer studies or something, and all you got was the voices of like straight cisgender men talking about queer people as the other, or talking about women as the other. Imagine if you went to like an African American studies course and everything was taught by white people, and all of the readings were by white people. You'd recognize that something's wrong. But that same recognition doesn't happen yet around autistic people, because they're so dehumanized in the discourse in psychology, and they're so dehumanized in within the dominant culture. So psychology students are not trained to listen to autistic people or made aware of their voices, except like, Temple Grandin, who's like a dinosaur, who's, this, ancient person who doesn't really hang out with other autistic people, and is to anyone who can read bodies, is like carrying a huge amount of trauma from how she was treated in childhood, and has really made her whole career of telling non-autistic people what they want to hear. Like, there's these generations, multiple generations of autistic people, and autistic scholars who are writing in the field and writing extensive critiques of ABA and how it traumatizes people. And it's explainable to a psychology student, to a bright psychology student. You can explain in the same way you can explain the harm done by like gay conversion therapy. There's because what's happening is autistic people have their own unique sensory and perceptual and cognitive experience, and their own developmental instincts for working with that. And ABA, the goal is this imposition of a performance of being non-autistic. It's this imposed performance of societal standards of normality. And it's being imposed at the expense of the child's natural adaptation strategies and coping strategies and integration strategies. They're not being given space to integrate, and they're being traumatized, and it's not always visible to parents of the kids. It's not always visible to the well-meaning students who become practitioners of it, because they're lied to and told, your child has no potential for healthy development unless they're taught in this way. And then what happens is there's this little fraud that goes on where if the child does anything, starts to do something for themselves they couldn't do before, the ABA takes credit for it. And if the child is having problems and falling apart, ABA is like, oh, they need more ABA. But it's actually, I find the opposite, that children who are being subjected to ABA and robbed of their coping strategies and their integration time and their free play time, they're more likely, they have more meltdowns and more overwhelm. And that's pointed to as evidence they need more ABA, but when they need is no ABA. And children who are not given ABA still develop, they learn, and the learning looks different. The trajectory is different from other kids, but they're learning and developing. And I mean, the autistic people I know who've really been able to thrive in adulthood, like myself, were never subjected to ABA. And I see worse outcomes and more trauma in adulthood in autistic people who were subjected to ABA as children, and who will tell you, ABA, like, it looked to my parents like I wasn't being harmed, but in the long run, I was robbed of my coping strategies and eventually fell apart completely. And so that's a story I just hear from autistic people over and over who are subjected to ABA. And it's obvious when you think about what's actually being done to the child, that they're being robbed of their sense of bodily autonomy, of their natural coping strategies, of the integration time they need, and their internal experience is not being attended to. And what's shocking to me so often when I hear ABA practitioners speak, and when I see what they write, when I see them in debates with autistic people, is the utter contempt that longtime ABA practitioners have for autistic people. Because they've been taught these people are only capable of being real humans to the extent that we condition them to be. And they end up with this extreme contempt that where, a person who feels contempt for a child should not be allowed to work with that child. But I think that they don't start out that way. But there's this process of self-justification. Once someone has been trained in ABA and they've started practicing it and harming children, it gets harder and harder for them to pull out of that because they have to face the fact that they have been harming children. And people don't want to face that. And so they become very good at justifying it to themselves and very resistant to looking at what they're really doing from the perspective of the people who've been harmed by it. So one of the reasons that you see, your young undergraduate psych students get pulled in, their first job is in ABA, is because the ABA industry actively seeks to recruit impressionable young psychology students who don't know a lot of psychology yet. Because once you've learned psychodynamic psychology and humanistic psychology, once you have a sense of how people actually work, you won't fall for ABA's ideology anymore. It becomes obvious. Anyone who's been trained in some basic psychodynamic psychology and basic, understands, basic play therapy, and understands Winnicott, and understands, how learning happens through imitation and play in children, understands the regulation of the central nervous system and how children need integration time for self-regulation. Once a person understands psychology to that extent, they're going to take a look at ABA and be like, this is all wrong. This has got to be harmful. There's no way this can do any good. So they have to recruit students who don't understand that yet. And once the students are recruited into it, they can learn more psychology, but they'll keep finding ways to justify to themselves what they've already started doing. And so that makes it a very delicate conversation. But I have seen students recover from it too. I have had undergraduate students who were working as ABA practitioners, and after they, took a course with me on neurodiversity, they switched to a less harmful profession. So. Yeah. People can see it, but they often have to be guided to it very gently, because again, it does involve coming to terms with this idea that, oh wow, I have been doing something harmful. I have the inclination usually that people have when confronted with that is to double down and defend themselves and defend the ego and defend their self-concept rather than make a change.
Yeah, and then they end up defending the whole framework of ABA itself. It's such an effective conditioning program to be effectively conditioning themselves into thinking that this is the only right way, and to be. I as you're articulating this so well, I'm really understanding that autistic people are going through something that is conditioning their natural coping strategies into a that is my own internal system for coping with the reality of my world is now wrong. And so now if I have this internal feeling of wrongness, that is so disintegrating of all of my all aspects of my life become so
Yes.
disintegrated, and that's a scary thing. And I, man, I guess I've even been when I've spoken to somebody that is an ABA practitioner, that maybe they've been doing this a couple of years. I think I've even been kind of fooled by their advocacy for the ABA stuff. Not as far as that I would. I every time I direct them to your work with neurodiversity and your articles on your website, but they will say, well, we're doing good things, we're helping in so and so ways, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe there's something there, but maybe I just haven't found the right articulation to help somebody, and it is something that needs to be gently done. I have found that I will bring up, well, there's a really a very different way to approach this, and I have felt like maybe this person no longer wishes to speak with me. It reminds me of a variety of things. It reminds me of in deaf culture, they sort of are conditioning in some areas. They can be conditioning out the culture of American Sign Language, the language and the culture of that dynamic. They can be kind of washing it out by being taught by people that are not deaf people, and by just having this autism, this privilege of being a hearing person, and this privilege is the very thing that is conditioning them to thinking that they're doing the right thing by helping somebody else. Maybe their heart is in the right place, but then their mind is doing very much the opposite of what maybe their heart intends on doing, which is helping somebody be able to be fully functioning in their lives with their own natural coping strategies, and a wealth of options in the ways of moving through the world. So it is really concerning.
Yeah, and I think that privilege you talked about, there's a quote that I quote a lot in these contexts, especially when I'm training therapists, is a quote from Carl Deutsch, who was a mid-20th century political scientist. And the quote is, "Power is the ability not to have to learn." And I think that's a big one, that there's these unequal power relationships. And so people can keep convincing themselves of their own benevolence because they don't have to learn what the people on the other side of the power dynamic are experiencing. And so that happens around that autism, and this paternalistic attitude toward deaf people. It happens in ABA's paternalistic attitude towards autistic people. And it happens in very different situations like colonialism, in the attitude of a colonizing culture towards a colonized culture. We're bringing civilization to the savages, rather than recognizing, oh, we're coming in and invading these people and destroying their culture. So I think that one of the things that comes up, what happens with ABA, is that the power differential is always there. The ABA practitioner has only dealt with an autistic child who's in a position of powerlessness. They've not, I don't encounter ABA practitioners who have adult autistic friends and teachers. And I think that's, that tells me something right away there. And so, and it's people assume these power differentials really interestingly, like in real what was I going to say? Well, what's the example I was going to say? Like when I walk into a classroom, and I people don't initially, unless they're very perceptive, people don't read me as autistic. I'm not far enough along in my gender transition process for people to, people read me as male, people read me as non-autistic. I walk into a classroom and people very often pick me out as the instructor right away. But I know, especially younger instructors who are women of color, especially, young black cis women colleagues will sometimes walk into a classroom and nobody will figure out they're the instructor until they call the class to attention. And that's this power dynamic of how people's stereotypes of who holds the social power. And that's this idea that like autistic people are always the client or the patient rather than the teacher or the peer or the equal. I encounter people when I who know they come. They know me in the context of my teaching about being autistic. They know I'm autistic, and when I tell them that I'm an aikido teacher, which is much more central to what I do than teaching about autism, much more long running. When I tell them I'm an aikido teacher, they make this assumption that I teach aikido to autistic people because they cannot imagine an autistic person in a position of wisdom and authority over non-autistic people. To them, the power dynamic always runs the other way. Now, I have a few autistic students. The majority of my students are not autistic. They're, the power dynamic is based on, they're trying to learn Aikido, and I've been teaching it for 40 years, and that's it has nothing to do with autistic or non-autistic, but there's people who can't make that shift around it. Just like I encounter students who, can't learn from women instructors, won't learn from women instructors because they've been raised with this sexism where they can't respect a woman's intelligence. And so there's this, those power dynamics keep showing up. And those are another form of tension and limitation, another form of ego defense, this attachment to learned power hierarchies. And that's another thing that we have to transcend in order to be able to make real connection, in order to be able to learn from each other. The power dynamics prevent people from learning and prevent people from authentic connection and prevent people from that shape shifting that lets them adapt to, oh, here's a new style of teaching, or here's a new a person coming from a place that I'm not familiar with, and I have to approach this with a certain new shape and a certain humility and ability to tolerate uncertainty and learn from it. And what I see, so often it's just the opposite, that people respond to anything outside of what they've already learned as a threat that has to be shut down. And that, we see that manifest as fear of immigrants and transphobia. And so it's, I think that often in the field of transpersonal psychology, we don't always make that connection and say, oh, this is a transpersonal psychology issue too. This is, it's almost like we have these little boxes that we put things in. Transpersonal psychology is this practice of ego transcendence, these psychology practices that transcends the conventional ego. And over here we have like social justice work and prejudice, and that's like a separate thing. But it's not, because I think that, real social justice comes about with these transformations, with these personal transformations that say, I'm recognizing my prejudices and internalized social hierarchies as another limitation, another thing that my ego has been trained to defend that I can let go of now. And so it becomes dealing with the other, dealing with like, oh, I don't understand this person's gender at all, or I don't understand the way that this person's experience works at all. That becomes another form of uncertainty that we can open to as a spiritual practice and learn not to have to defend our egos against.
This is a great time to let the tribe know about the GrayT Transforms website, graytransforms.com. This is a great place to go to check out all the links to the podcast. It's a great place to support the podcast, to support the channel. You can get a GrayT Transforms t-shirt with a transegoic gnosis symbol for transformation on the back. You can get a GrayT Transforms bullet journal. This is a simple tool, but this is a tool for mastery. You can get stickers. You can get a GrayT Transforms mug. So you can drink GrayT tea in your GrayT Transforms mug while you are taking notes in your GrayT Transforms bullet journal, while you are listening to high-level transformative conversations on the GrayT Transforms podcast. So comment, like, share, subscribe, follow, and together this tribe is moving humanity forward. Let's get back to this conversation.
I'm really understanding how integral the social dynamics are to all of your work. It is clear that somebody, the like a model that I like to work with is the societal dominance hierarchy, and it's clear that somebody in the upper half of the societal dominance hierarchy, without the awareness or just these unconscious social hierarchical things that are ingrained into them, will just find themselves unable to see the value of being taught from anything under that sort of definitive line on that hierarchical model, and then you're also missing that as that pyramid is shaped, you're missing the greater majority of information. The greater majority of information is in this bigger area. This is the greater majority of social dynamics, and people are living in this greater area. And so then that quote rings very true. Those that are in power are privileged to not need to know more. They don't need to know. They don't need more information because they are. I mean, in my opinion, on the wrong side of the social hierarchy. But you wouldn't want to be there because if it privileges you to know less, well, knowing less is not a it's not a proper function of a fully actualized human being. If you were to strive to be the best of what you could be.
Yeah.
So and then that same thing happens in the classrooms where like in these ABA trainings, when there is no autistic person be able to be there to inform people that this is really not the way that we are going to help encourage the best out of these people. And as the examples that you gave before, if I was going into a queer studies course and I am being taught, if I was being taught by white cisgendered men, and these white cisgendered men are also the writers of the textbook of the queer studies, it was like, where is the how is this information accurate? Where is this information really coming from? And there's a lot of that same issue is weaved and integral and running parallel to the Black American studies, African American studies, those sorts of courses where when we are in grade school, those textbooks are written likely by white cisgendered men, and then it paints this strange picture that is quite obviously missing elements. It's quite obviously missing key details in the, and they kind and it's kind of brushed off, and it maybe in very much a similar way that the ABA practitioners find themselves advocating so strongly for that method, when they don't realize that there's such crucial missing elements there. I'm also reminded of when I was growing up, from ages 17 to 21, I was in and out of jail twice a year. I was just I was in a lot of bad environments with people doing things that were just not serving my best interests. I found myself in a substance abuse program. There was an outpatient program. I did this program twice. The very first time that I was in this program, I had already known a little bit about psychology. I had already known that this was the direction of my life, that I was going to move in this direction. I was still very general. I didn't niche down. I wasn't narrow enough. I didn't know about transpersonal psychology. I didn't know about the more specifics of how I would be in the field. I just knew that this was kind of the direction that I was going to go in. And they brought up in this, I'm more of an advocate of a harm reduction model for addiction, and but at that time I didn't even know that terminology. And in the program, they brought in the initial sessions, they brought in the study of Pavlov. They brought in the Pavlov studies, and they told me, they told others that if I ring a bell, then this is triggering a response of drooling, and that is the same conditioned concept that addicts experience when it comes to substances. And I found myself very immediately angry that one would attribute me as a human being, that they would put me and a dog in the same sphere of conditioned, like there is some reputable, like the conditioning is a thing. It is a concept that is valid. However, the mechanisms and the psychology that goes into the conditioning of a human being with a very dynamic psychological profile in so many unique ways to the many billions of human beings on planet Earth is not the same. It is much more complicated than just the ringing of a bell and figuring out triggers. It becomes a whole dynamic process to unravel the maybe ineffective or the obstructing relational qualities that one might have to a substance or behaviors or the people or all of these things. And so I found myself so angry initially at things like that, and that is how I found my mother, being a deaf woman in a hearing world, when she is working at her job, they are not treating her with the sort of dignity that is necessary for her, just the basic dignity for her to do her job, to recognize. My mom has been doing her job for many years, and she ends up doing a lot of the work of other people, but not getting the adequate credit for the value of the work that she does, because of things like autism, because of this social hierarchy that is ingrained into people. And that is just it's baffling. So thank you for all that you articulated in that, and made that very clear of how that is running so parallel and integral with the social dynamics. So you have done a lot of work in informing people about this concept of neurodiversity. Can you unpack that a little bit? What is neurodiversity?
So neurodiversity is essentially the diversity among human body minds. So the idea that different minds work different ways. So just as, where the human species, is culturally diverse and is diverse in terms of people are different heights. There's diversity of size and height and diversity of skin color and diversity of culture and diversity of gender. We're also neurocognitively diverse. Different minds work differently. And there's, social dynamics around that. Just as with any other form of diversity, we get, people set up, we have this gender diversity in the species, and people set up gender hierarchies, patriarchy, and they set up social conventions about which genders are acceptable and which aren't. Oh, okay, there's, the heteronormative male gender performance, which you have to do if you're assigned male at birth, and the heteronormative female gender performance you have to do if you're assigned female at birth. And those are the two acceptable options. And other options are sinful or pathological or something like that. And the same dynamic, the same culturally constructed and culturally imposed normativity happens around neurodiversity as well. So this idea there's one narrow range of normal, there's one like right, normal, healthy way for a mind to work. And if one is not doing that normative performance, if one is not performing neuronormativity, then one is often pathologized for that. And we see that what I've been exploring lately around neurodiversity is something I call neuroqueer theory, which is extending queer theory into the realm of neurodiversity. So the idea in queer theory, that heteronormativity is, or cis heteronormativity is socially constructed and imposed on people. This idea that there's these, two binary gender roles. You get assigned a particular gender role at birth, and that's the role that you're supposed to stay in, and you have to perform it this way, and that performance includes heterosexuality. So that's imposed on everyone. The cis heteronormativity is imposed on everyone. And then its proponents and defenders claim that it's natural, but of course it was actually natural. They wouldn't have to do so much work to impose and enforce it. And so, cis heteronormativity can be queered. People push back against it, subvert it, rebel against it, liberate themselves from it, learn not to internalize it, diverge from it. Neuronormativity can also be queered. And neuronormativity is very much entwined with cis heteronormativity. If you look at, to go back to ABA, for instance, when an ABA practitioner is trying to force an autistic child to do an imitation of a non-autistic child, trying to force normativity on them, it's neuronormativity. You're supposed to move in a particular way and do your social connection and your thinking in a particular way, and to be normal, as they say. So it's this imposed neurotypicality, this imposed socially constructed neuronormativity that's being passed off as if it were the one natural way for people to be and the only healthy way for people to think and act and move. And it's very much entwined with cis heteronormativity, that when an ABA practitioner is trying to impose neuronormativity on a child, it's always act like a normal, non-autistic little straight boy or straight girl, Like, they're never like, don't worry, we'll help your autistic child act like a healthy non-binary child. It's always very entwined. The performance that's being imposed on the child that are trying to condition the child to do is very much entwined with cis heteronormative performance.
Mhm.
And so, the flip side of that is that neuronormativity and heteronormativity can be queered together, that one can sort of queer them both and liberate oneself from all of these different intersecting and interconnected forms of societally imposed normativity to be able to have more options.
Mm-hmm. And that standard of normalcy, that neural normativity, the standard of normalcy, the limited options that is right, based on some sort of abstract, ambivalent, unknown choosing of what right behavior looks like, except for as influenced by the upper end of the societal dominance hierarchy, it's built into the language that is the very pathologizing paradigm of the diagnostic statistical manual, and the things that are built into the more mainstream psychotherapeutic approaches. And so then you get words that I have, thankfully that I am have been informed by your teachings, is this word of spectrum, and this standard of normalcy that is identified and assumed by this word spectrum, that somebody is of the autism spectrum disorder. And whenever somebody says that that they have a child, or they know somebody that is on the spectrum, I really encourage them not to use this word, because it assumes that same standard of limited options. Can you say more about what you believe is the some of the problems in the language of that pathology paradigm?
Yeah, I think that we when we assume that autism is a pathology, when we approach it as if it were a pathology, then we impose a limitation on what we understand as a culture, and we impose a limitation on autistic people. And it's another way of imposing a limitation on the full range of human potential. Because if you say that a person, has autism spectrum disorder, and they have autism, and they're it's a pathology, or they're on, there's this spectrum where, like, the closer to non-autistic you are, the better. That what that does is it erases from our conceptual vocabulary, it erases the possibility of autistic thriving. So if the only way for an autistic person to thrive is to be more like a non-autistic person, then you've limited your options. You've limited options for the autistic person and for anyone who's trying to work in their interest. So, my experience as a thriving autistic person is autistic people don't thrive as imitations of non-autistic people. Autistic people don't thrive by trying not to be autistic. Autistic people thrive by finding how they're going to thrive as autistic people. And if you say, once you start pathologizing autism, the idea of thriving as an autistic person is off the table. It's and you see that affect professional practice. So therapists who are trained to view autism through a lens of pathology are looking at how to alleviate autism as if they're alleviating symptoms of a disease. They're looking at autism in terms of symptoms And the fewer, symptoms a person has, the closer they are to being not autistic, the healthier they are. If that's the goal, what's happening is that the autistic client is being pushed to imitate a non-autistic person and taught that being closer to acting non-autistic is the only way that they can thrive, but it's actually not healthy for the autistic person. It's not healthy to live as an imitation of someone else for the sake of pleasing others. And it's just like, it would be like encouraging your gay clients to stay in the closet and to try to live as straight people. And these days we know that's unhealthy. 50 years ago, that was what the profession of psychology did with gay people. And so that shifted, and the same shift is needed with autistic people. And so I think it's crucial to get rid of the pathologizing language in order to make us aware of the possibility of autistic thriving, and that the way autistic people thrive is as autistic people. So I have a different approach. I find myself in alignment with people, in alliance with people, especially in social justice work and such, where my reasons are different from theirs, where actually there are deep disagreements in a way, but they don't necessarily matter. We're coming at the same thing for different reasons. And so I don't like identity politics. I think it's another limitation on human potential. And I think the discourse on social justice has become extremely focused on identity politics. And we see it across the political spectrum, because there's the allegedly left-wing and progressive identity politics, where everyone is fighting over who's more marginalized and clinging to their various oppressed identities, and then you see it, on the right wing end of the political spectrum. I mean, white supremacism is the ultimate identity politics. Nationalism, fascist nationalism is the ultimate in identity politics, or the idea that we have to police people's gender identities and make sure that they stay with the one they were assigned at birth. So identity politics has become like, in defending and enforcing particular limitations of identity has become almost the chief political concern, like across the political spectrum. And it's prevented, I think it prevents real progress towards any meaningful social justice or positive social transformation. It prevents us from having a strong labor movement, because people are divided along all of these identity lines rather than forming any sort of class solidarity or worker solidarity. And it just keeps people, again, it's about psychological defenses that people feel these very reactively defend their identity categories. Yeah. And so I'm not a fan of identity politics because it does limit the human adaptability and the ability to make connections and form coalitions, and it places a limit on one sense of self. Mm-hmm. Places, I have to keep performing this identity because this is my identity, rather than recognizing that identities, because they're constructed, are fluid. They're culturally any identity category is culturally constructed, and we are culture. We are the culture. We shape the culture, and so we should be able to just be fluid about our identities and what identity is working for me. So often when I see people, I see people fighting against, pathologizing language, or being being sticklers about language for reasons of identity politics. Mm-hmm. And I'm also a stickler about language, mm-hmm. but for different reasons. I'm thinking not in terms of like, what's the politically correct way to talk about this identity and this identity and this identity. I'm thinking what works for purposes of human thriving. Mm-hmm. And so my reason, so I'll say autistic people instead of people with autism. And saying autistic people is often referred to as identity first language as opposed to person first language. But it's not about identity for me. Mm-hmm. It's about if you use language, if you say, person with autism, you're framing it like a disease, like something someone has. And that perpetuates the idea that autistic people can't thrive as autistic people. And when you say autistic people, when you're willing to say the word autistic as if, and without like this stigma around it, then you're saying, okay, this is another trait that the person has that which they can learn to thrive with. They can learn to if I'm an autistic person, that means I have to think about what it means to thrive as an autistic person, what works for me. And so I'm very into the utilitarian approach to language of what framings of the situation, what framings of this phenomena, of this reality are going to allow us to approach it in a way that fosters liberation and human thriving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really resonate with the concept of what is the utility of the language that is being used to encourage the thriving of the individual. I really resonate with the I'm not a fan of identity politics at all. I think another thing I'm realizing that I resonate with you about you, that something about you that I resonate with is that as you had mentioned before, when you are walking into a classroom, maybe people can identify you as the instructor of the classroom, but they cannot identify the pronouns that you use, she and her. They cannot identify the autism. They cannot identify the other qualities of identity that you find a relationship to that works for you, a relationship to that is thriving for you. I have a unique diversity in this deaf culture, and that has always been presented to me in strange ways. That it's just not something that can be seen on my skin. It's not something that can be seen just by looking at me. That is a part of my culture, and people are always so surprised. And sometimes the defenses against my interaction with them, the defenses against the engagement with me, sometimes those defenses are lowered when they are finding out that is also a part of the story. But all of us, so many of us, have a story of neurodiversity, of a diverse experience of identity and culture, and things like this that cannot just be seen, that is not always so apparent. And it really aligns also to just my namesake and my narrative around gray. And this podcast is called Gray Transforms. And so I've always believed in the integrating, maybe for very much the same reason. So what is the utility of this? What is the what are we after here when we are battling over which language is the right language, or sometimes the debates, the conversations, debates and arguments get really fuzzy. They get really confusing for what to what end, to what purpose is this serving the thriving of the individual, the actualization of an individual to be their best selves, and how they want to be engaged with in the world. It becomes really, really strange, really funky, but that the gray, the kind of the weaving it all together, that seems to be that seems to be what would be the best way in my mind. When I think of this, I think of also the academic writing. When I see that when scholars, young scholars, typically the audience here is going to be young scholars interested in transpersonal psychology, and other very intelligent people are going to be coming across this sort of podcast platform, this GrayT Transforms. And so they might recognize that all the language often is assuming and defaulting to the masculine pronoun. And because it defaults to the masculine pronoun of he and him, then you have these unconscious patriarchal dynamics that get weaved into the writing, and it takes away something so profound, so important, and that is also the feminine that resides in us all, and that we are all born of. We are all born of the feminine, and somehow in the writing it gets lost in the transmission of knowledge. Then because of this defaulting to a masculine pronoun, there's a control and a societal hierarchical dominance and power struggle over that. But when I have come across better writing, the better writing is often defaulting to a feminine pronoun, or is switching back and forth, using a bit of both. It seems to be more effective. It's now speaking to more of the human experience, and this is a really beautiful conversation. I'm so impressed by how well you articulate all of these things, and how much information is now archived in our little conversation here. It's so awesome. I can't wait for more people to get a chance to view this and see our conversation here. But you're also doing a lot of really cool other things as well. So you have a web comic called Weird Luck. How did you? I remember before the conversation started, I had mentioned that some years ago I had met with you when you were doing a small workshop around neurodiversity at CIIS, at California Institute of Integral Studies. We had dinner after with a group of people, and that was the first time that I heard that you were beginning this publishing company, and then now it has this web series, this web comic, Weird Luck, involved as well. How did that begin for you? How's that going? What can you tell us about all of those cool things?
Okay, well, this actually, I'm managing editor, one of the managing editors of an indie worker-owned publishing house called Autonomous Press, and so that's a thing that's happening, and we're kind of gradually, it's a small worker-owned press. We're just kind of doing it as a labor of love, put a few books out a year, and a lot of like queer speculative fiction, and just we're looking to kind of expand, like what books expand consciousness in various ways. What is it that like pushes the boundaries of normativity and expands people's horizons? And so sometimes that's nonfiction, sometimes that's fiction. But we have this annual anthology called the Spoon Knife Anthology that's is multi-genre, kind of genre-defying anthology of it's very difficult to define. It's just sort of stories we regard as neuroqueer, stories that somehow subvert normativity. And each volume is very different, but we're about to put out volume 7, so it's got a pretty long run now, and it's still going. You know, I'm accepting submissions for volume 8 right now. We have different editors, different team of editors for each volume. I've been, you know, on the editorial team for a few now, and I'm going to do it again for volume 8. And it's just really fun to help get people's creative work out there and spread good stories. But let's talk about weird luck, because that actually ties in with the transpersonal topic.
Yeah.
Here, it actually originated. My dear friend Andrew Reichart, I've been friends with him since we were in high school, and we're both writers. And we started co-writing stories and just collaborating on wild speculative fiction stories when we were still in high school. And that the stories got very shaped by our early transpersonal experiences, and especially our work with psychedelics early on. And one of the things we were playing with when we were teenagers, doing a lot of psychedelics, was there were a couple of things. One was the Jungian conception of synchronicity, and how sometimes when we were doing a lot of psychedelics, like pattern and synchronicity would become amplified. And so that was one thing. And then another thing was the way that, you know, on psychedelics, if one is moving around, like going between indoors and outdoors, or passing between different spaces or between different rooms, it's almost like you're passing into a whole other universe. It's like you pass into a whole other universe when you do psychedelics. But that experience of, like, here I am sitting in the living room, and I get up and go to the bathroom, and passing through the door to the bathroom where the lighting is different, like it's like I've stepped into an entirely different universe now. And so the those elements, that passing between different realities and the synchronicity and pattern thing, those came to really inform our fiction. And this concept of weird luck was how we talked about pattern and synchronicity. You had this term, you know, okay, we're having, you know, we've done acid, and here we are, like, romping around the town on acid, and we're having this bout of weird luck, where these strange coincidences keep coming that seem very loaded with meaning in the psychedelic state. And so we started we're both writing stories, sometimes collaborating and sometimes just writing independently. And we start calling the collective body of work the Weird Luck Saga. And it's got all these different characters that interweave and recur and, you know, show up at various points in their lives in various stories. We didn't start publishing until we were in our 40s. We didn't start actually publishing our stories. And then Andrew self-published a trilogy of novels, which are actually in the coming year are going to be re-released in revised editions. And and I started just sort of toward the end of my doctoral studies, finally getting some short stories and you know, sort of mini, you know, novelettes published, putting them into writing, you know, using the Spoon Knife anthology to get some of those out into the world. And so we started publishing more of that stuff, and we both always loved comics. Didn't really have time to learn to draw well enough, you know, neither of our skills were up to we both draw, but neither of us had the art skills that were quite up to the task of doing the comic we wanted to do. But we found our friend Mike Benowitz is an extraordinary artist, and he got very interested in our work and the sort of the fictional world we were creating. And so we ended up collaborating on this Weird Luck comic, which is right now a web comic. So publish a page a week with gaps, when periodically we have to do, because we have to take a long break sometimes, because it takes more than a week to do a page, because Mike's art is very elaborate and spectacular. And so it's a webcomic first, and each time we finish a volume, we'll put out in paperback, but we're still on the first volume yet so far, so that hasn't happened yet. So we're just we've got 4 chapters on the website is weirdluck.net, and there's 4 chapters, and we've been running some old material during this long break between chapter 4 and chapter 5, because the complexity of the story and Mike's art have both made a big leap, and so there's sort of this transitional period as we create this new chapter. So chapter 5 will launch sometime this spring, and I'm really looking forward to that. And yeah, it's my favorite project that I do, and it's 3-way collaboration, me and Andrew and Mike, and it's a really long, epic story that we're just at the beginning of. I think we've picked up some dedicated readers already, but I think very few of our readers have a sense of just how long an epic story they're into and how involved it's going to get. But they'll see. They'll start finding out pretty soon.
Yes, that's awesome. It reminds me of one of my favorite anime series is One Piece, and One Piece happens very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
You get like a 20-minute episode every Saturday sometimes, and then it just happens so slowly. But it's this like very drawn out epic story, and the narrative is so well written. And I just love hearing about your creative endeavors. I love hearing about transpersonal scholars. You're so articulate, so well spoken in all of the concepts of neurodiversity and psychotherapy and transpersonal approaches and somatic psychology and all of the academic things that you do. And you're an instructor and an aikido teacher, and then you do the web series as well, that creative things, and you have a family, and you're doing all of these things. How do you manage to get your hands involved in all of these buckets? Is there some sort of tips that you would encourage young transpersonal scholars that are going into being a professional outside of their graduate school? What would you encourage for somebody that wants to spread their wings, wants to spread their branches, to do to satisfy the many interests that we all seem to have?
I would say, and I want to say, like, I don't feel that I'm doing a very good job of satisfying my many interests, because I have so many interests and so many things I want to do and stories I want to tell and books I want to write, and I've done so little of it, even though it looks like I'm doing a lot compared to what my intentions are. I've done very little, but I would say,
I know the feeling.
Yeah, do what feeds you. Do what feeds you and gives you energy and gives you life, because that's, it's like, okay, the Weird Luck webcomic, it's like, that's a project that takes time, but it's so energizing to be doing it that it gives me more energy for the other projects rather than taking away from it. So I cut things out if they're draining me instead of feeding me. I look for things, oh, this is not serving me at all. I live like almost a monk-like existence a lot of the time. I live a healthy lifestyle, and I don't drink alcohol at all. And so there's this way I have of, work, keeping my energy up just through healthy living and focus of on what I do, and really looking for what feeds me. That I have a marriage that feeds and energizes me. I have the friends and the conversations that feed and energize me, and the creative projects that feed and energize me. And then all of these things I'm doing support each other. I think that's crucial in the sense of their interrelations are not always obvious. And I think that throws people off. People assume my Aikido teaching must have something to do with, the neurodiversity work, and it doesn't, and people assume, that the comic must be about like this other work that I do. And it's not exactly, but they do form each other. Like there's queer themes that show up in the comic for sure, and there's these themes of transformation, these psychedelic themes that show up there. And so, and I'm constantly revising as well. And that's crucial. Like the neurodiversity work, the work around autism in particular, has kind of stopped feeding me. It's become a bit of a drain after it's been a big piece of my career for a while, but I'm actually starting to make a transition. Here's something that you probably haven't heard yet. It's brand new news, but I'm actually going back to school in the fall to get an MFA in writing, because I'm going to make a transition over the course of the next several years from teaching on psychology and neurodiversity stuff to teaching creative writing.
Beautiful.
So I'm bringing this, like, okay, the creative projects are feeding me the most, so I want to bring my teaching more into alignment with that. So that constant modification and adaptation and avoiding getting stuck in a box is a big part of it.
Yeah.
I think I was looking for a long time. I made the mistake of thinking that I had to do stuff in a particular, like I had to find a career or something. I had to find what I wanted to do. That what do you want to be when you grow up question. And I didn't do anything meaningful for a long time. I kept teaching Aikido, but I didn't do anything meaningful for a long time because I couldn't find the thing. But there's not the thing for me. I just want to follow the flow of my interest and curiosity, and I end up producing a lot of very interesting things in the process. I think that's key. Like I would say, pick 5 interests and pursue them all at once, and start looking for what the common themes are and how they connect to each other, and start looking for, are any of them a drain or are they all feeding you? And they don't have to make sense as a single body of work at any point, as long as they're all feeding you and somehow part of your flow towards who you want to be in the world.
Well, that is awesome advice. I love that. I love finding the encouragement for people to do the things that feed them most, that not the things that are draining them. Get rid of the things that are draining you as much as you can, and move towards those 5 key things, or whatever those key interests are for you. Find out where they are weaved together, find out their parallels, but find out the things that are feeding your soul, feeding your mind, feeding your body, so that you can be a fully energized, functioning person in the world, and continue to be generative in all the ways that you want to, and satisfy all of those interests. I love this conversation that we've had, and I am fully fed by this conversation, fully fed by this interaction. This is a full circle moment. It's really amazing to me. Thank you so much for
thank you
for being a part of it.
It's been a delight. It's been absolutely wonderful to get this chance to speak with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that other people will be fed by this conversation as well, for many years to come, I hope. And so hope that they will share it with others, share it with some ABA practitioners, share it with some other transpersonal folk. And thank you so much. So
Thank you, Travis.
neuroqueer.com, and did you say it was weirdluck.com was the comment?
Weirdluck.net.
Weirdluck.net, neuroqueer.com.
Yep.
But
That's right.
yeah. And so you can find all of Dr. Nick Walker's work and all that she is doing moving forward along those websites, along those things. And I can't wait to see more of the mastery in fine arts and more of that writing. It's going to be great. It's great to call you a comrade. It's great to call you a friend. Thank you, Dr. Nick Walker. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. It has been a great pleasure. Look forward to next time we get to speak.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
That was a great conversation with Dr. Nick Walker. She was my first transpersonal teacher. She was my first advisor 10 years ago. She was encouraging me to follow the flow of my interests, to be in the field of transpersonal psychology and be everything that I am today. She is phenomenal. So much value in that conversation. It was more than autism and neurodiversity and identity politics and societal dynamics. It was all of that and more. It was the humanness in humanity. So comment, like, share, subscribe, give it a thumbs up, put it in your watch later if you don't have enough time to watch now, but watch that full video. There is so much value there. And together we are moving humanity forward. Check out these conversations that I'm having with thought leaders and transformative specialists all the time.